A rich man tried to humiliate a black waitress by making her play piano in front of everyone. Big mistake, because what she did next, it shut him up and earned her a standing ovation. Before diving into the story, comment where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the latest stories. The restaurant was upscale, velvet booths, a baby grand piano in the corner, and wine that cost more than a week's rent. Waiters in crisp black uniforms floated silently between tables, pouring vintage reds and plating tiny, artful entrees with tweezers. Everything about the place whispered luxury and exclusivity. Jasmine had worked there for over a year. She wasn't a sommelier or a server, just a busser, one of the invisible hands behind the curtain. She wiped down tables, refilled water glasses, and quietly cleared plates. She kept her curly hair tied back, wore shoes that pinched after 6 hours, and moved like a shadow. Most customers didn't even notice her, which was usually fine by her. Until tonight. Mr. Carrington was a regular. The kind of man who thought his presence alone was a gift. Rich, loud, and always surrounded by people desperate for his attention. Jasmine had seen him dozens of times, arriving in tailored suits, barking for another round of drinks, leaving without a thank you. He usually came with dates, younger women who laughed too loudly at jokes that weren't funny. But tonight, it was worse. He came with PowerPoint. 3 men in dark suits and a woman in a navy sheath dress sat around his table, laughing in that brittle way that meant deals were being made. Jasmine could feel the tension from across the room, the kind that clings to money and ego. The group had gone through 2 bottles of Bordeaux and half the menu by the time Mr. Carrington's voice rang out above the hum of conversation. He turned his eyes toward the corner of the room, where the baby grand piano sat gleaming beneath a soft spotlight. Then he looked at Jasmine. She had just finished clearing a table nearby and froze under his gaze. "You people are good with rhythm, right?" he said with a drunken chuckle, gesturing to the piano. "Go play us something. Let's see what you've got." The words dropped like a glass onto a marble floor. Shattered silence followed. A few heads turned. Laughter died off. A fork clinked against a plate. Jasmine blinked. Her heart started pounding. Did he just? She glanced at her manager, who stood frozen behind the host's stand. His eyes flicked from Carrington to Jasmine and then back again. He said nothing, not a word, just a stiff nod that meant don't make trouble. Jasmine could have walked away. She could have let it slide. It wasn't the first time someone had said something awful. It wouldn't be the last. But something in her stomach twisted tight. A rope pulled too far. She stepped forward. The restaurant seemed to shrink as she made her way to the piano, the low hum of murmurs giving way to a breathless hush. Carrington smirked, his drink in one hand, phone in the other, ready to record what he assumed would be a joke. Jasmine didn't look at him. She sat down at the piano, hands trembling just slightly. Her fingers hovered above the keys, and for a moment, she closed her eyes. What Carrington didn't know, what no one in that room knew, was that Jasmine had studied music for most of her life. She played in church choirs before she could read, earned scholarships to summer conservatories, even auditioned for Juilliard before her mom got sick, and everything else had to wait. She took a breath and began to play. The first notes were soft, hesitant, like footsteps entering a sacred place. Then came the melody, smooth and aching, something between jazz and classical, with flourishes that shimmered like sunlight on water. Her hands danced across the keys, slow and then quick, coaxing emotion from the piano in a way that silenced even the servers in the kitchen doorway. It wasn't just music. It was storytelling. It was memory and longing and everything she'd held back for years. When she finally stopped, the last note hung in the air like a held breath. Silence. Then, slowly, a single clap. Then another. And another. Within seconds, the entire restaurant erupted in applause. Mr. Carrington's smirk had vanished. He looked stunned, the phone in his hand forgotten. His guests glanced at each other, unsure what to say. The power in the room had shifted, and it wasn't his anymore. Jasmine stood, gave a small nod, and walked back to her station. Her cheeks were warm, her chest tight with something like relief, or maybe pride. As she passed her manager, he mouthed something. Maybe sorry, maybe thank you. She didn't stop to find out. There was still work to do. But tonight, for once, people saw her. Not as a servant, not as a stereotype. As someone who had something to say, and said it beautifully. Everyone expected her to say no to smile awkwardly, mumble something about being too busy, and slip back into the shadows where she always stayed. To walk away, with her head down, pretending it didn't bother her. Maybe even cry in the back room, like she had once during her first week at the restaurant when a customer made a rude comment about her accent. But Jasmine didn't move away. She stood still. For a moment, the world quiet around her, like time was holding its breath. Then she took a deep one of her own and walked toward the piano, the velvet booths, the clinking glasses, the whispering voices. It all blurred into the background. She didn't look at anyone. Not Mr. Carrington and his smug little grin. Not her manager, who still hadn't said a word. Not even the people who had pulled out their phones to capture the moment. She just walked, slow, steady, shaking a little, but not with fear. Her hands trembled because she hadn't done this in years. Not since the funeral. Music had been her whole world once. Her sanctuary, her secret language with her mom, the one person who had always believed she'd be something bigger than a waitress in a black apron. They used to sit at the upright piano in their tiny apartment for hours, trading melodies, laughing when their harmonies clashed, crying when the notes said what words couldn't. But when her mom got sick, music became background noise. Something she didn't have the time or heart for. Rent needed paying. Hospital bills piled up. The piano was sold. And the silence that followed became normal. Until tonight, the baby grand in the corner had always been just another decoration to her. Something expensive and untouched, collecting dust under the dim spotlight. But now, as she approached it, it looked different. Not intimidating, but familiar. Like an old friend she hadn't seen in years. She pulled the bench out slowly. It groaned just slightly as she sat, the soft leather cool against her legs. She stared at the keys, polished and waiting, her reflection rippling faintly on their surface. Around her, whispers floated like smoke. Is she actually going to play? Oh God, this is going to be embarrassing. She doesn't look like a pianist. A flash from a phone. A muffled chuckle. A stifled gasp. The energy was thick, half mocking curiosity, half awkward tension. Everyone expecting a disaster. Something to record, send to a friend, and laugh about later. But Jasmine wasn't thinking about them. She placed her fingers on the keys, gently, reverently, as if touching something sacred. Her breath caught. Her eyes fluttered closed, and then she played the first note. It rang out, low and rich, like the opening line of a story that had been waiting too long to be told. Then another, and another. The melody unfolded slowly, hesitantly at first, like a wound reopening. Her fingers moved with practiced grace, each note a step deeper into memory. The piece she chose wasn't flashy. It wasn't something you'd hear in a concert hall or on a viral video. It was a lullaby, the same one her mother used to hum when Jasmine couldn't sleep, the one she learned to play when she was 8. Simple, pure, honest, and it silenced the room. No one laughed. No one spoke. Even the servers paused mid-step, frozen between tables. The whole restaurant leaned in, drawn by something they didn't expect to feel. That Jasmine's hands moved faster now, confidence growing with each measure. The music swelled and softened, rose and fell, tender, aching, beautiful. It told a story no one in that room could see, but everyone could feel. Of love, of loss, of strength found in quiet places. The world outside disappeared. There was no Carrington, no manager, no whispers, no phones, just her, and the keys, and her mother's memory humming along with every note. When she played the final chord, it echoed like the last word in a conversation that didn't need a reply. Silence followed, and then, slowly, softly, applause. One pair of hands. Then, two. Then a wave. Not polite or performative. Real. Earnest. Like people clapping not for a performance, but for truth. Jasmine opened her eyes. She didn't smile. Not right away. She just breathed, really breathed, for the first time in a long time. And then she stood, straightened her apron, and walked back to work. It first. It was soft. A single note, clear and deliberate, like the beginning of a sentence that had waited years to be spoken. Then another, weaving its way into a gentle melody. Smooth, flowing, like water trickling over stones in a quiet stream. It was unexpected, subtle, not showy or dramatic, But there was something in the way Jasmine's fingers moved, something careful and reverent, as if she were unearthing a forgotten part of herself one note at a time. Then the music began to build. A classical rhythm bloomed beneath her hands, elegant and structured. But layered over it was something warmer, richer, a hint of jazz soul that gave the piece life. Her left hand kept time, anchoring the rhythm, while her right hand danced. Bold trills, sharp runs, notes that struck like lightning and vanished just as fast. It was a fusion of discipline and emotion, of training and instinct. A sound that didn't belong in a restaurant. It belonged on a stage. The room began to shift point one by one. The investors around Mr. Carrington's table stopped sipping their wine. Their conversations faded to silence. They leaned forward, mouths slightly open, eyes drawn to the corner of the room where Jasmine sat, eyes closed, body swaying gently with the music. The ambient noise of the restaurant dimmed as if the building itself were holding its breath. Even the kitchen staff emerged, chefs in aprons, servers holding plates mid-air, dishwashers wiping their hands on towels as they crowded near the swinging doors. The entire room was transfixed. Mr. Carrington's smirk, the one he wore like a badge, began to fade. His laugh had died out minutes ago. Now he sat still, arms crossed tightly, watching with narrowed eyes. But he wasn't bored. He wasn't amused. He was stunned. Jasmine wasn't just good. She was extraordinary. Each note was precise, but filled with heart. The music told a story of pain, of resilience, of joy rediscovered. It was raw, vulnerable, and full of power. She played like she had something to prove, but not to them, to herself, to the girl who used to dream big, to the daughter her mother had raised to shine. People were still filming, but not to mock her anymore. Not for a quick laugh or a viral clip at someone else's expense. They were filming because they knew, deep down, they were witnessing something rare. Something that didn't happen often, and certainly not in the middle of a dinner service between bites of filet mignon. Magic, that's what it felt like. Magic with a heartbeat. Jasmine played with her entire soul. Her back curved slightly, her feet pressing the pedals just enough to carry the sound, her face full of quiet focus. She wasn't performing. She was releasing everything she had buried for years, the grief, the sacrifice, the longing. It poured out of her like water bursting through a dam. And then, the final note. She held it just a second longer than expected. It rang out, high and pure, filling every corner of the restaurant. Then, silence. Not awkward silence. Not confused, but awestruck. The kind of silence that follows truth. And then, thunderous applause. It started with a single clap from someone at the bar, then another from a table near the window. Then all at once, the room erupted. People stood up. Someone whistled. Glasses clinked from the force of hands pounding on tables. Even the kitchen crew joined in, their faces lit up with pride and wonder. Jasmine opened her eyes slowly. Her chest was tight, her fingers still hovering over the keys. For a second, she looked disoriented, like waking from a dream she wasn't. Ready to leave. Then she stood, no bow. No smile. Just a small nod. To herself more than anyone else, she turned to walk back to her station. Her eyes briefly met Mr. Carrington's. He didn't speak. His expression was unreadable, but the power he carried into the room had vanished. Jasmine hadn't humiliated him. She had simply risen above him, and that hurt far more. The applause continued long after she disappeared behind the staff door. And though the room would return to normal eventually, something fundamental had shifted. Jasmine wasn't invisible anymore. She was unforgettable. Jasmine stood up. She didn't smile. She didn't bow. She didn't even glance at the crowd still clapping in stunned awe. She just rose from the piano bench, smooth and steady, and turned toward the table where it had all started, the one lit by laughter and arrogance only minutes before. Mr. Carrington sat there, stiff, arms crossed, trying to save face. But his smirk was gone, replaced with something unsure and tight around the eyes. His drink sat untouched. The investors beside him looked awkwardly at their plates, unsure of what to say. Jasmine walked straight up to the edge of their table. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She looked him square in the eyes and said, clear and calm, "Keep your money." The words cut through the air like glass. There was an audible gasp from a woman seated nearby. A fork clinked against a plate in the distance. Even the background music, which had resumed low and soft from the sound system, seemed to shrink away. Jasmine didn't wait for a response. She didn't care for one that she turned on her heel and began to walk away, back toward the kitchen. The place where she was supposed to be, where the world had always put her. Where no one asked questions, where no one looked twice. But before she could reach the staff doors, a voice called out, "Excuse me, miss." She stopped. Jasmine turned around slowly. The speaker was an older man, seated near the back of the restaurant. He wore a navy suit, simple but tailored, and had kind, curious eyes behind gold-rimmed glasses. His white hair was brushed neatly back, and he held no phone, no wine glass, just a folded napkin in his lap and an expression of gentle purpose. "Do you teach?" he asked. Jasmine blinked, confused. "Teach? I mean," the man clarified. "Do you give lessons? Piano? Music?" She shook her head slightly. "No, I work here." Her voice was soft, matter of fact, almost apologetic, but the man just smiled, calm and warm. "Not anymore," he said. The room quieted again. Not with shock this time, but with anticipation. "I run a music academy downtown," he continued. "We're always looking for instructors who understand music the way you clearly do. Full scholarship. Teaching opportunity, too, if you're interested." Jasmine's breath caught in her throat. For a moment, she couldn't speak. Was this real? This wasn't part of the humiliation. This wasn't pity. There was no laughter, no mockery, just sincerity, and a quiet offer that felt too good to believe. Mr. Carrington looked like he'd seen a ghost. His mouth opened slightly, as if to argue, but no words came out. His face turned red, then pale, then unreadable. The investors exchanged glances. No one said anything, because no one could change what had just happened. He had tried to turn her into a joke, a punchline, a party trick for his table. Instead, she had turned the room into a concert hall. She had turned silence into power. And now, that silence, the kind you couldn't buy with money or influence, had delivered something even he couldn't control, a future. Jasmine finally found her voice. "You're serious?" she asked the man, hesitant but hopeful. "As serious as a heart attack," he said, his smile widening. "Come by tomorrow. Bring nothing but yourself." Jasmine nodded slowly, heart pounding. "Thank you," she whispered. She glanced one more time at Mr. Carrington, not with anger or pride, just quiet clarity. Then she walked toward the back, her pace calm, steady. She passed her manager, who was now staring at her with something between shock and admiration. He opened his mouth to say something, but Jasmine didn't stop. There was nothing left to say. She disappeared through the kitchen doors, the same ones she'd walked through every night for over a year. But this time, everything was different, because somewhere between the first note and the final applause, Jasmine had stepped into the life she was meant to have. One that didn't wait for permission. One that didn't beg for respect. One that had always been hers. And not even money, not even Mr. Carrington's money, could buy a moment like that. What no one knew that night. Not the manager who barely remembered her name. Not the servers who clocked in beside her every day. Not even Jasmine's closest co-workers who joked with her during shift breaks. Was that she had once been a musical prodigy before the apron. Before the endless shifts and the aching feet. Before the customers who called her Miss, like it was a word too small for even basic respect. Long before any of that, there had been music. She had started playing piano when she was 6. Her mother, a single parent and a school librarian, had saved up for a used upright piano that barely fit in their tiny apartment. It was scratched and slightly out of tune, but Jasmine treated it like it was made of gold. From the moment her fingers touched the keys, something clicked. It wasn't just a hobby. It was a voice. Her voice stopped by 9. She was performing in local recitals. By 12, she had her first scholarship to a prestigious music program. And by 14, she had stepped onto the stage of Carnegie Hall with her small hands steady and her heart full of dreams. The world told her she was gifted. Critics wrote about her potential. Teachers called her exceptional. But dreams don't pay hospital bills. When her mother was diagnosed, everything stopped. The lessons, the tours, the letters from Juilliard. Every hour went into caregiving, and every dollar into medicine and rent. Jasmine sold the piano, traded concert halls for restaurant kitchens. The girl once called the next great pianist of her generation disappeared behind black uniforms and serving trays. She didn't complain. She didn't cry, not in public, anyway. She just did what needed to be done. Because sometimes, life isn't about chasing greatness. Sometimes it's about survival, and the music? It stayed locked inside. All of it. Until that night. Until one man's cruelty, a single line said too loud, in front of too many people, opened the door. She thought it had been sealed forever. The irony wasn't lost on her. It wasn't a stage that gave her the chance to play again. Not a scholarship, not a competition. It was a challenge. A dare. A rich man with no idea who he was speaking to, mocking her without knowing he'd just lit the match. And when she played, she didn't play to impress. She didn't even play to prove him wrong. She played because the music had never left her. It had only been waiting. Waiting for a crack in the silence. Waiting for the moment when Jasmine would finally remember that she was more than a waitress, more than a background face in a velvet-lined room. She was a musician, a storyteller, a soul built from chords and keys. Sometimes, people try to measure others by what they wear, what they earn, or what job they do. But talent, soul, purpose, those things can't be bought. Mr. Carrington had money, power, connections, but none of that could help him when the room turned. Not in anger, but in awe. He had spoken to her like she was invisible. But after her final note, he was the one who disappeared, forgotten, irrelevant, humbled by something he could never own. And Jasmine? She walked off that makeshift stage with nothing in her hands, but everything restored. The applause was thunderous, yes. The offer from the Music Academy was life-changing. But the real triumph wasn't the recognition that it was the rediscovery. She had found her voice again in a room filled with chandeliers and overpriced wine. It wasn't money that stole the show. Not the investors. Not the suits. Not the whispered deals over steaks and scotch. It was a young woman in an apron. A woman. No one had noticed, until she reminded them what real brilliance looked like. And the piano? It didn't care about status. It never had. It just waited, patiently, faithfully, for her to come home. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs a reminder that their gift still matters. On this channel, we tell real stories that prove one thing. Purpose doesn't fade, it waits. Until next time, stay inspired, and never underestimate the quiet ones. Blackheart.